Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Thursday, which means it's time for a new FL Basics tutorial. This one is, it's actually kind of like an intermediate level concept, but this answers questions that people might have that they will encounter when they use FL Studio for most things. And this has to do with the question that people have when they look at some of my mixes and with the mixer, and they'll see that a lot of the inserts and the master are constantly in the red, but there's not clipping going on, or if there is clipping, they think that it's like there's some kind of like sinister sort of hidden effect that it's having, and there's a sort of a complicated reason for why there isn't clipping, and it has to do with 32-bit floating point audio, and you might have seen this when you go to render a file. Sound rendering file, and you see on the wave options we have 16-bit, 24-bit, and 32-bit float. My wondering is just what's going on? And if you have a rudimentary understanding of what bit depth is, you know that between 16-bit and 24-bit there's more room inside. There's more dynamic range. Not that there's more headroom because they both cut off at 0 dB, but there's more space in between 0 dB and minus infinity and where the noise floor is, kind of thing. So in recording terms, that's very good to record in 24-bit because then your inputs are going to be more, the peaks are going to be farther away from the noise floor, which means that you can turn them up or compress them more before the noise starts to become apparent and devastating to your mixes. There's more detailed reasoning behind that, but all that we really need to understand right now is that 16-bit and 24-bit cut off at 0 dB. 32-bit does not. Now, that might be a confusing idea to work with because this may or may not be a thing that is unique to PCs. I was talking to BT about this, and he did test and see that Ableton Live on the Mac can render out in 32-bit. I don't know about internal playback, but it can render out in that. Now, I mentioned internal playback, and why is that important? Well, that's because if you go into audio options, we go over here to the status where it shows us all our various input, outputs, sample buffering, whatever. Over here we see INT 32 LSB, and what this means is that FL Studio's internal playback is playing back in 32-bit floating point. Now, I'm going to show you an example of what this means in terms of internal mixing and sort of perception of what going into the red means. So I'm using a 3x OSC. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a note, and I'm going to intentionally force it into the red until it clips. And it will clip. You'll see it clip. So, okay, turn it up more. All right, there it is. It's clipping. So we see it going into the red, and we also see that it is in fact clipping. So now, interestingly, if we turn down the master, we see that it's actually not clipping anymore. We can see that the waveform is back to being its own built of sine waves and nice and smooth, despite the fact that insert 1 is definitely in the red. It's over 0 dB. We can look at the big meter here. We see 0 dB being passed quite a bit. And in fact, it can be passed even more, but we can still turn down the master and it won't be clipping. So right there, we've already demonstrated that you can go into the red but then when the information that's going into the master isn't clipping. But that might be confusing as to why. So I'm going to demonstrate this by rendering the supposedly distorted sound. So right now it's distorting. It's distorting. So I'm going to render it as an MP3, which is going to output at 16-bit or 24-bit, 16-bit, I think. I actually don't remember what bit depth is for MP3, but that's fine. And I'm also going to render it out as a 32-bit waveform. Distorted sine. I almost just said sine, like signage. All right, so 30-bit float, 320 kbps MP3. Boing. Okay. This is the MP3. This is the WAV file. So now they both look pretty identical. Do they not? Distorting, distorting. Now, you might have just noticed a clear difference there in that when the MP3 was playing, the main output wasn't red. But this output is red. And it's also distorting, but they sound the same. They sound identical. Now, we also noticed that when I turned down the master, when it was going into the master from insert 1, the distortion went away because it was no longer going over 0 dB. Watch what happens when I turn down the MP3. It gets quieter, but it's still distorting. And this is because when it rendered out in 16-bit or 24-bit, whatever, 0 dB cut off any of the peaks that were going above it. So this means that that information is gone. That printed distorted information. That's what it printed. So when we turn it down, there's no getting it back. And if we turn down the 32-bit WAV file, it doesn't distort. This is because the 32-bit WAV file preserved all the information going above 0 dB. I am not entirely clear as to how much information. Someone who I trust on the matter said something that, according to the math, you'll have something like not plus 2 dB, not plus 3 dB, not 6, not 12, but 1600 dB above 0 headroom, which is just stupid. It's just crazy. It's obscene. Like, you would have to, I don't even know if I could make something, I mean, I could make something that loud, but like it would, that's just like dumb how much headroom that is. And even if that's not accurate, the point that that means is that you basically are never going to clip unless you try to, unless just your mission is to make something that's at plus 1600 dB. So this is good. And not only is this good for, like, you know, rendering out a master where you're preserving all of your clips. Actually kind of funny. If I hit the normalize button, it actually makes it quieter. Because what I may have mentioned this in the channel settings window tutorial, but when you hit normalize, it brings the highest peak up to 0 dB. So if you have a file that's really quiet and you hit normalize, it'll bring the highest peak up to 0 dB. But if you have a 32-bit WAV file with information above 0 dB, it'll bring the highest peak down. It'll bring the whole thing down until the highest peak is at 0 dB. And it can do that because it still has the peak information that's above 0 dB. It doesn't even know what 0 dB is. It doesn't care. It's just how much information. It's just information. It's there forever. And now this is what's going on inside FL. Everything is running around internally at 32-bit floating point, which means when you see stuff going into the red, data-wise, the information is not clipping. So then now you're probably thinking, why is it clipping? Why are we hearing distortion? And this is because despite the fact that internally the audio is running at 32-bit, your physical speakers, drivers, be it internal sound cards or external sound cards, are all cutting off at 0 dB because they're 16 or 24-bit. As far as I know, there aren't 32-bit playback interfaces, which would be kind of cool. But so the point of that, and actually especially for this recording, I have the microphone's information set. I wonder if this will show. It's at 2-channel 24-bit 44 100 hertz. So that means that despite the fact that the information is not being destroyed, the playback is incapable of playing it back. It's still going to distort it. But that doesn't mean that it's gone. It does mean that you can come back from it, because this means when you make something like this sound, which without normalization is above 0 dB, and then you put a compressor on it, like a limiter, for example, we can see that it goes above 0 dB, and then we can bring it down. And as we said before, with your 1600 dB of headroom, no matter how much crap you're piling on into the master, you can always turn it down to the point where you can bring your peaks in below 0 dB so that your playback, the actual audio that you're hearing from your speakers played from your sound card, isn't clipping because the information is being preserved. So this answers the question as to why I make seemingly retarded mixing decisions in my tracks. This is because in the 32-bit world, the kinds of mistakes that you'd run into by having what is basically a terrible mix aren't a problem. This is also why, like, if you ever turned off the master effects on some of my tracks, the mix before it just is stupid. It's not balanced. It's not reasonable. It's not the traditional method of making a mix at -60 dB so that some mastering engineer can bring it up and make it punchy and cool. It's just whatever I felt sounded good at the time. Because I also have my master effects engaged the whole time when I make a track, so that I'm making my decisions being colored by the final product already. And that's a whole other thing. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that I can make those decisions without worrying about clipping things into the master, because they're not going to clip. Unless I really, like, like, again, on purpose, tried to make something that's more than plus 1600 dB. So yes, this is a kind of an advanced topic to really get the theory behind it, but in practice, this is basically the basic idea of letting you know that there are protections in place for things going over 0 dB. So, people are always like, oh, how do I mix? And then they read traditional tutorials or mixing engineers who don't. I don't know if other DAWs do that. I haven't used them. I've only really ever used FL. I mean, I've used Reaper to do recording, and I've used Logic at my friend's place, and I used Digital Performer once for recording and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if internal playback at 32-bit is a thing. I guess it's probably not if people get confused with the whole clipping aspect in the mixing, just by looking at the mixer sort of thing. I mean, the idea of like the -6 dB mix and making the mix before you do master compression is a thing born of, like I keep saying, traditional recording, like traditional mixing methods, and it's because it's from traditional methods that weren't really designed to take into consideration the kind of music that we make. You know what I mean? But that's just my thought. But point being, now you know stuff. Oh my god. It's a good thing I found this mic poof. It's very effective. How cool is that? Seriously. Yeah, so if you have any questions, let me know. And I also want to bring up that I started a Patreon campaign recently. There's a video of it in my channel. I'll link it in the description. But basically what it is it's kind of like it's like an ongoing Kickstarter, where Kickstarter gives you a whole huge lump sum to make a big project and you go and do it. Patreon is the way that I have it set up is basically inviting you to voluntarily enter into a subscription for me. And like Kickstarter, there are rewards for such things at like various levels of donation. But so check it out and read the information and watch the information video and all sorts of stuff. And if you like, you can donate. If not, that's fine, because I still love you. I love you anyway. I'm not saying that you need to give me money. I'm saying I would definitely appreciate it if you give me money, because it would make lives easier. But in general, I'm still going to do what I do for free anyway. And there's rewards. So there's that. So yeah. But if you have any questions about that, let me know, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And as usual, have a nice day. Again, with the editing of the clip, I'm just being lazy.